Hey, special educators, I'm Jennifer from Positively Learning. Welcome to the Special Educators Resource Room. If you're like me, you're always looking for ways to save time and streamline your work. That's why this podcast was created, to give you the systems and solutions you need to get your time back. Tune in for tips, tricks, and tools that will help you manage your workload and make the most of your time. Whether you're brand new or experienced, all are welcome in the Special Educators Resource Room. Hey, special educators, this is Jennifer from Positively Learning. Welcome back. This is part 2 of what I did at the end of every school year to make things as easy as possible and to get myself motivated to clean up the resource room. So I did share some tips that I used the last 4 to 6 weeks of the school year in the last episode. So be sure to check that out. I do want to put just a little disclaimer also. I was sharing what I did at the end of the year, and it sounded like I was doing a ton of spring cleaning. Now, no one needs to do that. That is not expected. We know how busy the end of the year is, but my disclaimer is that I did that to kind of survive those last 4 to 6 weeks by doing those types of projects. The spring cleaning that I laid out in the episode, it gave me like a pep in my step. Like I was getting excited because I felt like I was shopping my resources and getting out some new stuff to keep the kids going. I really enjoyed doing that. It kind of helped me get to school every day and knowing that I was seeing progress I was making as my room was getting cleaner. And of course, I benefited in a big way by not having to do this the very last week of school, the summer, or when I returned. So now I want to continue the conversation and pick up right where I left off. I was talking about our physical space for cleaning up, and now I want to get more into the nitty-gritty things we need to do. So when we're getting towards the end of the school year, we know our routines get a little bit mixed up, but in my experience, we also sort of found some free time. I don't know about you, but some of our students were being pulled for different testing, so that kind of lightened the attendance in the resource room. We had many students, for some reason, like not attend school quite as much at the end of the year. I'm not sure why. It's like almost everybody was just kind of crawling to the finish line. So I had a few things that I was always doing whenever that free moment appeared. And again, it was really to avoid working outside of my contract hours or coming back to a mess. Our back to school was always extremely hectic and with a lot of meetings. And I knew that even though it seemed like I might have time to work on my room, I did not. So here's what I did. All right, every school will have their own requirements of what you need to do to pack up your room. And ours changed from year to year. So you can't just have an expectation of exactly what that's going to look like. Definitely check the guidelines. But in general, we did have to clean up our room pretty well, push everything to the side, stack up our furniture or loose pieces, and so that our floors could be waxed and painted. And fun fact, I'm pretty sure our floors were never waxed or painted, at least not in the resource room for the years that I've taught. But we can dream. And so I wanted to tackle how I approached packing up my room. Now, my first recommendation is to start with a space in the resource room that feels really easy. That way you won't be procrastinating getting started. And once you get that project done, you'll gain some momentum. So this is just our getting started step. For me in the resource room, I would not start with student work files or our classroom library, but instead I would pick this one spot that was super easy. It felt easy to me. And it was our writing area. Could do a whole nother episode on how we set up our writing stations because I finally found what worked for us. But in a nutshell, it consisted of student resources that they could access, and they were evergreen, which means they were not seasonal. I did spruce them up throughout the year, but they pretty much followed the same pattern. I had word banks for my students. I had picture word banks, and they also had list style that my students could access. I also had a section for their composition books, all the different writing utensils they would need, a writer's checklist, and mentor sentences. So that always stayed pretty much the same. Oh, I also had a space for unfinished work and finished work. So my students knew where everything could go. So that is a station that felt pretty easy for me. To pack it up would probably take 15 minutes or so, but it's a start and it would get me started. So I usually tried to pick something very easy so I could get over that hurdle of being completely overwhelmed. So think about what your area in your resource room would be easy for you just to get started. Check that off your list so that you have some momentum to keep going. Now, in the last episode, I did lay out exactly what I did as I walked through all the different bins and cleaned them out. I'm just going to recap here, but I highly recommend you go back and listen to all the details. But what I would do is I would go through the resources. It felt like shopping in my bins, and I would pull out anything that I'm just never going to use. I mean, if I haven't used it in this school year, I'm most likely not going to use it. Or if it didn't just bring complete joy to my students. We have very limited time to get everything in. I am not going to waste it on something that's not going to be just awesome when I have plenty of resources to offer them. So I would just really be pretty ruthless. And if it didn't spark joy, out it went. Okay, I'm going to move on, but be sure to go back to that last episode to find more about cleaning your physical space. So that's the classroom. You want to follow the school guidelines. Definitely be a little heavy-handed as you clean out your bins. The next thing is the paperwork. You do want to also follow the guidelines of what needs to be filed and what can be pitched. Every year, we did spend one day auditing our files, and it was a mess. So this was a day that every special educator was down in the special education office where the files were locked, and we would come with our paperwork. This is a place to have music. This is a place to have snacks and camaraderie, and we would have a filing party. We would also have a shredding party too. And it was awful and wonderful. It was awful because to prepare for this day, you had to, check all the boxes, cross your T's, dot your I's, whatever that phrase is. And I often was just sitting at the printer, printing out tons of things. But the great thing about this was it was fun to see other special educators. We never get to do that enough. And when the day was over, you were done and your files were cleaned. So our IEP chair was a non-teaching position. But what was kind of neat is that it was a former special educator who held this position. So she was just awesome. And she had on the front of every IEP folder exactly the order everything went. And she had these on bright color Astor Bright paper, and it made it so much easier. So I had my stacks in that order. So I looked at her file page, I had my stacks, and I had stacks of things like a copy of the IEP and the attendance reports and the communication logs. We had third-party billing we had to file, indirect consultation notes. I'm trying to think of what else we had, but we had to make sure all of those things were there. In our district, we did this in chronological order. It was so much easier to do this in one sitting, one very long sitting, than to do this on a regular basis. That just seemed to take forever to open each folder and 3-hole punch everything. It was much easier to save it up. I hope that you get to do that too at your school. All right, so the paperwork filing party is over and the shredding stack is probably huge, but now we know that the next special educator to grab that folder is going to have everything waiting for them. All right, we've done the classroom space and we've done the paperwork. The next thing is copies. So much more paper. So you definitely want to make a plan of what you need to keep, and you might even want to run copies on the last days of school and pack them up with your room. The reason I suggest this is not to be wasteful with your paper, but have you ever seen the back to school copy line? And our copiers were the kind that didn't usually work. And that's just stress to me. I would much rather get it done when everyone's watching a movie or having a field day or doing some type of other cleanup task. The copier is usually free. So if you can, make a plan so you can get those copies. What type of copies are you going to make? Most likely it's going to be, for me, progress report cover letters, IEP meeting reminder notes. I have a template for those. Anything that's a template that can be just filled in real quick for the next year, things I know I'm going to reach for over and over. Maybe it's some data sheets, observation forms, things like that. I'm not going to go crazy and make copies of things I don't need, but I do know that first few weeks of school are so hectic. I also had some welcome kits. I used the same ones every year. I have those in the big special education bundles, and it's just the letters I can go home, introducing myself, how to reach me, asking for family and caregivers' preferred way to communicate. Those are things I reused every single year, so I could make copies before I even walk out the door. All right, so we are making progress here. You have filed everything. You've tackled the paperwork. You've purged what you don't need. You have cleaned up your physical space, and you may have made some copies so that your first week back goes smoother. The last thing we need to do, and we really can't do this till after the students leave the building, is push all your furniture to the side, stack it up, or whatever you need to do at your school. So I have two big pieces of advice. First of all, you hopefully won't have quite as much to clean up because you have thrown out things that just are not working for you anymore. But my big piece of advice is to take photos. Your classroom's probably all clean now. This is a good time to take photos of where everything is. You can refer to those for back to school to set up everything quickly. If it was a space that worked out really well, say that your chill zone was just like working perfectly for you, take some photos of it before you do the final packing. That way next year you can set it up the exact same way and continue to do that throughout the classroom. Another reason that I learned to always take pictures, I do this with my own house too, just superstitious, I guess, was one year we had someone in our building had the wrong directions, and they came into the classrooms and they threw out everything. It was a really sad phone call when my principal had to call me. She felt horrible. I was devastated. Everything was gone. So it was just a long story. One of the floors in our school was getting renovated, and they chose the wrong floor to, get demo. If you've ever seen HGTV shows, that was kind of what it felt like. It was pretty rough. So anyway, take photos. You never know when you need to refer to them to show things that need to be replaced or to be put back. And the last thing to do after these photos are taken and you're ready to move that furniture to the side is I would do this backwards. Whatever is going to be in the very back of that pile or at the very bottom of the stack should be the things that you're not going to need right away. So those are the things that can get buried. The things on the outer edge should be those things you can grab right away when you come back. I have had an IEP meeting the first week of school. So I would want my IEP meeting folder or anything that I needed for that really accessible. Whereas we usually didn't start writing centers or anything like that independent work until September, when we've had a chance to meet our students and get some routines in place. So those are the things that could be buried in the back. So I wanted to backwards pack up my room. That way, when I came back, I could unpack my room in a way that made much more sense. So those are my tips for you. I know they may have sounded pretty simple, but that works for me. Be sure to listen to this episode along with the previous one. I have part 1 and part 2 about closing up your resource room. These are great episodes to listen to anytime throughout the school year if you're just looking to clean up your space, and to make things feel much more manageable. I had gotten it down to a fine science, and I'm happy to share these tips with you. I do have an end of year special education checklist. I also have a blog post. I will put the link in the show notes. Be sure to click on over to get more details and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'm dying to ask, what'd you think? Be sure to hit the follow or subscribe buttons so that you never miss an episode. You can find the show notes and links for everything mentioned in this episode at positivelylearningblog.com. See you next week for more special education solutions.